Hey, I'm Tommy Ellison, and this is Senior Moments. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast this morning, but I remember every detail of that time I came this close to being suspended my senior year in high school, just 3 weeks before graduation. So stick around. This is proof that some things from a misspent youth just don't fade away. Let's go. You caught me and I wasn't quite ready, and I will be shortly. Hi guys. I had a little problem getting my earpieces in this afternoon, and I still don't have them right, so bear with me. It's what you call authentic live. And I'm just wondering, hang on here, I've got one more other quick little setting that I need to figure out here. Well, all right, I hope this is coming across okay. If you're out there and you're watching, you can give me a quick comment and let me know that the audio is okay. Here's part of the problem. I don't have my microphone close to me. Yeah, it's been one of those days. So, welcome, by the way, to Senior Moments, number 14. Hard to believe I've already got 14 of these things in the can. And so this is number 14, and it's called Nuclear Panic in My Pajamas, and you're probably wondering what in the world I'm going to be talking to you about today. And I have to assure you that this is actually a true story. I would not make it up. I would not lie. I am not exaggerating. But the senior memory was somewhat triggered by a recent little I guess a couple of episodes I had. I enjoy old movies, and one of my favorite channels on my streaming service is the Turner Classic Movies. It's actually part of YouTube TV, which I use for my streaming service. And I've been watching some of these old movies, and I've noticed they have these little trends with Turner. They'll kind of take a theme, I guess you would say. And the last couple of days I was watching, I've recorded some of these, so they were like flicks that were designed to kind of incite fear when they were made about nuclear. It was shortly after, the bombing of Japan, and the whole Cold War thing was starting up, and there was always that, race, I guess, to have the most missiles and the nuclear missiles and all. And so there was a number of movies made about it. Some of you may have heard of them. There was one called Dr. Strangelove, which was a really, really weird movie. And the Crimson Tide, if you recall, was made more recently, where there was a impending nuclear exchange. And then the one that I was watching that kind of triggered this thought and idea about where I'm going today, and this memory from yesteryear, was the Bedford incident, where a submarine and a U.S. destroyer, Russian submarine, were kind of playing cat and mouse and tit for tat, and one of the gentlemen on the destroyer accidentally launched the missile, and the Russians got off nuclear torpedoes, and the movie ends with just this great big fireball. And probably, some of you probably are old enough to remember back in the late 50s, 60s, during the height of the Cold War, when we were in school, and they would have drills where we would actually go down to the basement of the school and hide our heads between our knees and actually practice, kind of like a fire drill, but instead of going outside, we actually went to the basement. Y'all remember that? If you do, then hopefully those days are over, but you never know. But anyway, this memory, and got a comment here. Let's go to this comment right quick while we're doing this. Donna, my friend Donna Hardy, Fairfield gal, says, caught you live for the first time. Are you proud of me? I am proud of you. And I hope you will continue to watch, Donna. But anyway, what I was saying about this story was this particular memory is kind of burnt into my mind because it was October 22nd, 1962. And it was, you might remember that evening. In fact, you might ask me how I actually remember the exact date. Well, because historians around the world documented this date and kind of, reinforced it. And as I said earlier, some of us were actually alive on this date. I was about 10, maybe going on 11. And it involved the Cuban Missile Crisis. President Kennedy had just gone on national television, and I assume somewhat, maybe even worldwide television, but and he had a real chilling message to Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev was his name then, and he showed the U.S. the pictures of the military satellite photos that were made over Cuba by our spy planes, and he was showing the photographs of the Russian nuclear missiles being unloaded, transported, and stored in Cuba, 90 miles off, our southern border in Florida. And see, this wasn't a war game. This was the real deal. But that was a great movie too, War Games, I think it was called. But this was reality, and Kennedy went live on television, delivered the ultimatum to Russia, and essentially said, remove them or you will face the consequences. And he actually even kind of sweetened the deal with his ultimatum by establishing a what do they call those things? A blockade around the island of Cuba, with all ships coming and going to prove he meant business. But my point in bringing all this up was talking about the tension. You could cut it with a knife. We think about now that era, and it's I guess there's a reasonable amount of tension still, but as a kid, you could really feel it. I mean, the fear that night was thick in the air as we watched Kennedy deliver that message. My parents felt it. The whole country felt it. And that night, we all went to bed, uneasy. And that's where this memory kind of starts, because then sometime after midnight, not really sure what the exact time was, my mom burst into my room and she shakes me awake and she says, get up, get dressed, pack a bag. We're going to the river. Well, I was, half asleep, groggy, stumbling around in the blinding light that she lit up in my room. And of course, when I got up, I realized every light in our house was on. And I pulled on a winter coat over my pajamas and slid my feet into some old tennis shoes, or may have been baseball cleats, who knows. And I never even thought to put on real clothes in the hustle and the bustle of all that was going on that night, with her yelling and trying to wake my sister up and hollering at my dad, Tom, we need to do this. Tom, we need to do that. And I wasn't thinking about fashion as I walked to the kitchen. And then I heard it. The siren. The old air raid siren sound that, we knew from school. And they used it in tornado drills, but this was for the old air raid siren. And of course, in my little kid brain, that meant one thing. It's happening. I mean, Kennedy gave the ultimatum. Russians have decided, to play dirty, and it's happening. The Russians are attacking. Now, this is my perception of this. The missiles, they were on the way. Now, one thing you have to remember, and if you weren't born yet, you probably never knew this, but Birmingham and Fairfield were considered prime targets. I mean, the steel mills made our city a bullseye in the event of a nuclear or an attack on our country. And even the CIA had a list of likely Russian targets that they had come across, and Birmingham was near the top, in the probably top 20 or 30, if I recall. Now, my mom, she was in full crisis mode. Y'all excuse me for just a second. She was in full crisis mode. She was filling up old Clorox jugs with water, because down on the river, we didn't have running water. We had to take our water down there. And she was grabbing canned goods from the pantry and boxing them up for transport, trying to figure out how many she could get and pack them the best way possible to get the most number of cans and food in the boxes that she was packing. And she was packing everything that we could potentially carry to survive what she knew and thought to be was going to be the Holocaust to come. Now, Dad, being a deputy sheriff, he was holstering pistols and grabbing the shotgun and shotgun shells, getting ready for, I guess the infantry to come into the country. And he'd be ready to fight off those, red bastards that were soon coming to Alabama. And he knew what he was. I'm speculating. When you're a 10-year-old kid, things kind of grow exponentially in your mind. And both of them were just at DEFCON 1, and their instinct to survive was kicking in like a stubborn mule fighting a rattlesnake. Now, my baby sister, about 1 year old, she was in like DEFCON 9. She was fast asleep in her little Jenny Lynn baby bed. Well, what was our plan? I asked, I said, where are we going? And Mom and Dad, they were preparing to head to a remote cabin on the Warrior River, far away from the city. It was not just any cabin, though, because this was the cabin my grandpa and his older sons had built years earlier. And it was kind of like a Estock family getaway for summer vacation and winter fishing trips. And it was an old cabin. We spent many a week down there during the river. My mom and Dad wouldn't take exotic vacations to the beach. We would always go to the river cabin. It was a very rustic, like I said earlier, no running water, nothing that exotic. It didn't have running water, so you know what we had outside? We had the little Johnny house, where you went to the bathroom. And I'm not sure really what their thinking was. I don't know what would have happened if all 10 of the Estock brothers and sisters had shown up with their immediate families. It would have been a pile of folks. But none of that goes through your mind in this kind of situations. We were, like I said, in DEFCON 1, ready to get ourselves out of Birmingham. But, having a bunch of folks here was the least of our worries. Job one was to get our family safe and sound in that remote location, far away from the strike zone of those missiles we saw in the satellite photos earlier that evening. You can only imagine what was going on in my parents' mind as they were moving to provisions to the back of the house to load up the cars. And in fact, I was in a panicked fog. I had no clue. And there I was in my pajamas. I guess I was going to spend the rest of my life in those pajamas and that jacket. And as we were making our way out the back door, my dad suddenly came to a halt to our little parade there. And it wasn't the Russians. And there was no attack. And there was no missiles in flight. They were standing down, and my baby sister turned over in her sleep again. It was his police cruiser, his car that he drove home every night. And as it turned out, there was a short in the wiring that triggered the car's siren. And it was blaring through the night like the world was ending. And here's the kicker, looking back, I remember thinking that none of our neighbors ever heard it. Their houses were dark the whole time, while ours was lit up like, the doomsday had arrived. And looking back now, I guess it's funny. It's hilarious. It would be a good TV sitcom about dysfunctional families. Raymond could probably have a lot of fun with this plot. But at that moment, it was terrifying. That night, and of all nights for it to happen, it had to happen on the night that Kennedy had delivered that ultimatum. That's why it's burned into my brain so bad what the date was. But that night taught me several lessons. It taught me more than I realized at the time, but it showed me how quickly fear can take over when we don't really have all the facts. It showed me how strong the instinct to protect family really is. And looking back, that night wasn't just about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It was about how we face fear and how we lead when it matters, and how time, I guess, has a way of turning even our scariest nights into lessons worth remembering. And let me give you a little tip. Always keep your empty Clorox bottles filled with water and stored away for emergency. Now, I know you may laugh, and I'm laughing with you. You may laugh at that. But, when my mom passed away 6 decades later, and I had the job of cleaning out her house, she had a dozen or more Clorox bottles filled with water underneath the steps to the basement. Seeing those when that adventure took place took me back to this crazy night in '62 when we thought the world was coming to an end. And, well, speaking of coming into an end, I appreciate your watching. I hope you will pay attention to what this next handsome fellow is about to tell you. But I do appreciate you listening. Donna, thanks for being here live with me. I hope those of you who are watching this on the replay will leave a comment and listen to this reel going out, and be sure and do what this handsome guy is going to tell you right now. You have a great evening and take care. God bless. Well, hey, thanks for spending a few minutes with me on Senior Moments. If you enjoyed the ride, be sure and tap that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next one. I'll be back soon with more stories from a misspent youth, and maybe some of yours too.